All right. This one has to go much, much deeper. Are you in this as well, Susan? I got your message. You can type to me as well. I have two monitors here that I can see your typing, so then I can just answer you if you wish. Let me know if you can't see well enough and I'll move the camera. Cool. Thank you, Susan. Are the tips embedded? What do you mean by that? Embedded. maybe where they meet up with the rock? Is that what you mean? Come on. Okay, good. All right, now that's good to know. I've never seen them either, but I've made quite a few, just like this. Alright, I have to round this in here and cut that out. I made a few mistakes in the beginning on different carvings when I was learning, and I cut this area out right here. You can see it, I'm pretty sure. And one of the things that I did there was, why are you doing that? And one of the reasons that I cut that out is I thought, you know, it's a nail, it's a claw, you know, it needs to stick out past, you know, the appendage. But like fingernails, they stick out past the finger. So the finger itself, or the end of the finger, which is this area, has to be present. And these are like, you know, wrinkles or ridges on the end, which I've seen on most dragons. So those got to be there, and then they'll blend in and look pretty. But this part right here, that has to stay, and I have to round it into this first ring. So that's what I'm gonna do now. Sorry about that. I can bring that down further. Probably about there. Sometimes my camera angles aren't the best, which is why this feed has two angles, one from above and one from the side. I've gotten it to the point where I can move this around now and play with certain heights so that you can see things. I just wanted to make sure that you could see it at least from one angle. I'm happy to give the explanations. Let's now bring in the roundness of the tip of the finger. We bring in the roundness right here, then we can start to round off this this bottom of the finger here. Let me see what I need for that. Probably this tool will be best. It's funny, for years and years I did not use these tools, which are skews, and now I got like 8, and I use them pretty much all the time. I think initially when people see a skew, they're like, what can I possibly do with that? I can cut a straight line. That's hardly helpful when most of what I do is, you know, rounding and stuff like that. You know, the typical carver would think. And that's exactly what I thought. So, didn't use it for years. And then I found out that I could turn the tool while I was using it. And when I found that, I was like, oh my God, years and years went by without utilizing it. Very good tool to have. And having them different sizes as well is good too. Alright, let's look at this on the easel. I'm going to make a bit of noise here. Sorry about that. Alright, let's flip this thing over, I guess. Alright, so we need to bring this appendage down lower because the middle one, as in most fingers, and they have to correlate because all we know is human and animal, and so we have to correlate to what we know, and this finger is going to be larger than all the rest, so we have to bring this lower than this one, even though this hand is sliding to the left. So I'll bring this down next, and again cut in again. It looks like you do as a carver, we end up doing a lot of extra work by redoing work, but if you don't define it, you can't carve it, so you have to define it. Additionally, I consistently put it back on the easel and look at it from where you want your viewer or your customer or your onlookers to be viewing it. So most people aren't going to be viewing it from this position or whatever position, this position where we do most of the work. It has to be perfect right here. Your angle may not be perfect, but I'm looking directly at it. So that's how it has to be. Therefore, you have to continue to put it back on the easel all throughout your project. But as a carver, you know that. But for people that listen to this in the future, people that are learning how to carve, that's something that a lot of people don't do, or at least initially. And that would be to just work on it all the time, and then, you know, if your measurements or your distances or your awareness of the spatial area doesn't match your drawing, then you'll never know. So you got to keep putting it back on the area where you want it to be a completed piece. So I always put it back. Let's go cut this guy down a little bit lower than this, or at least the same height. And then once we get that guy in, then we'll start working on the thumb. Move you guys back into position again. Yeah, skews can be tough to sharpen, but I've gotten a system over the last 25 years or so, and I I can help you guys with, I have a small tutorial, I mean just a basic tutorial for sharpening tools, but the skew for me doesn't seem to be that big of a problem. As long as it's flat on my wheel, we're good to go. The way I do things is I use a buffing wheel, and the buffing wheel itself is where all of it happens. I cut the leather, I attached it to the wheel, you know, I use compound just like everyone else does, but I definitely use a wheel because the wheel is the fastest method possible for me to get done with sharpening so I can be carving. So, you know, without that, things would just come to a halt. So, anyway, move that back in place, and then move you back in place. Alright, so let's get to this. Probably we're going to end up needing to cut this appendage a little bit more, but I've left plenty of material here, as you've seen, from this entire process. So let's start with this guy. We'll bring him down to where we think we can live with the cut. Alright, that's not the same height, but it appears to be from this angle. So we'll put our line back in there again. I have to follow the contour of the hand. So let me ask you, are the cameras that I have good enough for you to see what you need to see? I've tried to do that before, and it's messed up my entire feed. I'll see what I can do about that. It's not so easy, but I will do my best to do some research on that this week and see what I can do. Okay? It's pretty tough to get 2 cameras to work. That took forever. So let me see if there's a way I can enlarge that, or possibly zoom in a little bit more. I'll do what I can on that. Have an answer for you next week. All right, so now these knuckles are obviously kind of skewing my view, but I don't really want to touch them until I am ready to work on them. Now I think I'll get into here. Cool, but I'll do some research anyway, because I don't like that view either. But I think it's important to have that view, since this is where I do a lot of the work. As long as I keep my hands out of the way. It's not so easy sometimes. I know that sometimes I'm covering the work and you can't see anything, but I try to get in there and get it done as fast as I can so that you can at least see the result. Sometimes I just need to be in here for my own method, but I do my best to not be in the way as much as possible. Alright, so now these can come back at any time now that I got the appendage in there. This one has to be rounded a bit, but I don't think I have the right tool for this. This one needs to be sharpened in order to get in there better. So I'll do that later. We do need to now get this appendage to look correct. So maybe what we should do is first, before we start cutting this material away, we should probably bring this arm into the proper position. So we have this down. This is obviously up higher, but it's sticking out too far. So we'll try to round off all 3 of those by cutting the sharp parts off. And then we have to swoop it backward as well. So this one looks pretty good, but I think maybe more. And this one has to follow suit. this one as well. And then we will bring our lines back into play. That's right, the line goes up and around and then around. And this one goes up, goes up and in and then around. And this one goes pretty straight, except that it's rounded here, cuts in here, goes up here, and then around. So now we'll bring these guys into a position. Let me read what you read. Cool. All right, let's use the infamous skew again. I might need a longer skew. Yes, this will be better. Now, I should probably mention this. Let me get a drink. Right here, we have the edge of the appendage, this small finger right here, this line here. So this space here has to stay put. the end of the hand is over here, and thus this has to stay put. But this indentation has to either get deeper when I make cuts here, or don't make cuts here, I suppose. But since that's impractical, I just need to remember that this has to go deeper, but I only have so much to work with here. So I've got to be careful how much I remove off in this area, because this whole line here, this dirty line right here, is the appendage. If that goes away, it doesn't look right. So I got to be careful with this. But I'm pretty much done with this, guys. Just clean up at this stage. So I'll just be sure how much I end up taking off right there. Alright, well, gotta get it right here. Try to follow my line as best I can. Now I'm going to put in a slightly more divot here. Alright, clean up a little bit over here. Alright, then we'll cut in the other couple as well. Alright, this one needs to come in a little bit better. Now, I should probably mention, you can't see into the future, meaning that I know what's coming next and next and next and all that other stuff. But something for me to fall back on is that when I've finished cutting everywhere, when I've finished cutting, there'll be scales on the dragon. So I'll go in and basically sand everything down, and after it's all sanded down and pretty and appears to be done, at that point, once I've sanded it all down and gotten as much of the fluff that basswood produces when you sand things off, I will then start applying scales. That's a love-hate relationship right there. Scales are so, gosh, you're time consuming and they're repetitive and it can be a pain in the rear. But the ultimate completion makes you happy that you did it. So when I put in the scales, it'll transform the entire carving. He'll stick out and all sorts of things. You've seen all my other work as well. So you can have the concept of this doesn't look done, it doesn't look right, it's not, I mean, the appendages look correct, but it's plain, and there's all sorts of feelings you can get from that. But once the scales get on, then once the scales are cut in and put everywhere, it miraculously changes the entire aspect and feeling of the work. So there's a lot of, you know, plainness that I can leave in, you know, on the work, but once the, you know, scales get on, it's just a huge difference. Alright, so now that I've gotten that, I think that's about right. Once I sand this, these will round up a bit. These angles will stay put. I'll probably put a slight bit more depth in there, but I'll know once I start playing with this one. My drawing is so small that basically I have here very little detail in here. This is basically a, you know, this is basically a pretty small appendage here, and this appendage is basically just going to, you know, come off and go down, and then like the rest of these, it will cut back and then go into the nail, just like that. Now the thing is that because this is 2D, it's really not very clear, as I can imagine, even less clear for you. But this appendage is basically going to be parallel to this surface, which means that it's parallel to, you know, the back of the carving. So if you have a hand, you know, and you put it down, this particular appendage is sticking out like that. But he's also turned, so even if nothing goes right angle like that, it makes sense because this would be 90, and if his hand is turned, then it's facing 90. So I've got to get that to go completely parallel to the surface, to the back of the carving. So it's weird because these three are sticking forward and slightly to angle, but this guy's literally sticking that way 90 degrees from them. So I want to make sure that that works, but that means that the rest of this appendage here, basically in between here and here, this appendage here has to be quite round. I mean, I'll have to round all these areas here and here as well. And then there's a separation of this appendage and this, and so you see very little of this appendage, but it's going to have to be rounded. So all of these positions here, all of these areas here have to be rounded properly in order to match up with this nail. So let's round the nail, and we round the nail now from the get-go. Then we can just apply cutting as necessary because the whole thing is round. Alright, so if the appendage is now more or less round, we determined that this nail try to get this in a place you can see it. Look at this upside down. So the nail will come up approximately like this, and then it has to go into the hand, so it rounds as well right here. It's rounded here, and then it kind of just rounds out around here somewhere and then cuts down like that. Now if we do that, we're going to leave a little more space for ourselves to work here, so we'll just cut, because once you cut, it can't be brought back, as you know, so we'll cut in a different spot at that point. Give me the tool. We'll cut the nail formation and then cut it to the ground like that. Now, just like with the other ones, we have to round it in to keep this portion. This is part of this digit, so we will round that all the way in. Now remember, I cut a little, I was being sparing with how much I cut for the nail, and we did round the nail, and we have depth to cut this further lower, so we know that if we make these cuts here and here, and we clean this up here to round it so it looks like part of the appendage, the rounded top of the finger, so to speak, we know that we can cut what we need to get that to happen, because we can always just cut the nail back again. Leaving yourself extra room is a key point. We also need to put in our little ridges, which were on these guys as well. Put in our ridges. There are two sets of those. Now that we have the ridges in, we can now cut them to match. It is a little further behind the other appendages, so we have to consider that these little details that we're putting in now will be also slightly smaller than the ones you see in front. These are sticking forward and in your face. This one's slightly behind. It'll be in shadow once I get shadows in, and it is behind, so it'll be slightly smaller. You can see that these whatever you want to call them, rings, these rings are larger than this one because, one, there's very little to work with here, and two, it is behind, so we'll make it slightly smaller, this one being the biggest. So now we have the cut, so now we have to round the tip of the finger. Now that the tip of the finger's there, we know that we have to, that not only do we have to, but we can cut parts, this one little triangle in here out of there. And once we cut the finger out, that part of the finger out, then it will start to take better shape. Some of the wood here has been rough for so long that it easily snaps or just breaks away. So you have to be careful to use a sharp knife here or a skew that's really sharp as well. So I'm going to do that, really sharp skew, and Don't cut too far into that the rounded part of the appendage. All right, that's pretty round. All right, that's not bad. At least I think that's not too terrible. So now we can clean up the nail and maybe draw it back as well. It just depends on what we see once it's clean. All right, let's cut in our rings here. And we do that with a V tool, V parting. Like I said, some of this material has been around for some time, so it's more apt to chip away or break away than it is to just come away with a V parting tool. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll make the edges, I'll cut the edges off where it's starting to break away, and then your tool should just be able to cut right through it. No problem after that. No problem. Both sides. Let's not forget that. Both sides of that lip. And we can round it with the back side, or rather the front side of our gouge. Both sides. And now we just need to determine what the appendage looks like. It doesn't look exactly like these, or I mean it should, but we don't really have a good understanding. So why don't we go ahead and say, here's this is not correct. This is the top right here. The top really does need to be over here. So let's fix that. Let's bring in, or push away the top portion of this nail. There we go. Better. More is better. All right, that's enough. Now we'll put our line in. Does skew that way a bit, but that's because we haven't cut this side to match up with the front of this. And we're not sure exactly whether we want it to end right here, meaning not here but here. So we're not going to cut any of that because once it's gone, it's gone. So we'll just say this is the mid ground. So we'll probably, it goes that way, so we'll just go up and then we'll stretch it forward and out like that. Right. I think we're probably pretty late into the section here. Okay. Ha. Yeah, scales. All right. Well, I will continue to do that. Let's go ahead and finish this appendage, and then I'll call it for the night. All right. All right. Well, these guys all tilt into a peak, so we should do the same for this one. Only this is going against the grain, so if I try to cut in like this, it might flake away. So I'm going to, I will go from this angle and see what my tool gives me. Yeah, it's flaking. So I hate to, can't really cut from that side. So we'll come from the bottom and see what we can get out of it. No, that's flaking too. So I need a super sharp tool. And let's see what we can get out of this one. Alright, I'm going to cut it free. Alright, so that's pretty clean. Alright. Yeah, that's not terrible. And we do need to put in some, a bit of roundness here. sure if that's enough. We might need to get in there with the Dremel later on. See what we can try, or maybe some sandpaper. Yeah, it's just breaking away. It's really tough to work with right here. Alright, that might be as best as we can get it at the moment. It's still higher here. It's still higher right here and here than it is here and here. So it still slopes. And since it does still slope, it's probably enough. But we'll play with that later as well. Let's do the other side. Bring it in. We also want to maintain this little ridge right here. If we can. So we have this tiny ridge right here. 1 and 2. We'll try to bring this into our line. And then of course, we didn't cut this down perfectly, so now we have to. Tool again. So a little more depth here. Cut again. Okay, try to get our hole back in there. Got a slight ridge here, here. All right, so now let's go ahead and look at it again from the get-go, from over here. So we know we're looking at the right thing. Let me just get it in here again. All right. So we will, oops, look up a bit. All right. That's not terrible. All right. All right, I think we've gone over like, oh yeah, almost a 2-hour lesson today. Usually an hour, but it's been fun talking with you, Susan. I will need to play with this area next, and I'll do a video as well and show it to you. All right, Susan, thank you for the evening, and we'll see you again next week if you're available. Otherwise, we'll just see you on Patreon in between. Thank you. Have a good night. Where's my mouse?